Hello and welcome to Save Democracy. I'm Katherine Davies. I recently noticed there was a campaign that had been successful in the Westminster Parliament in the United Kingdom, running a workshop explaining how they did it to the public. I thought we need to speak to those people and invite them onto the podcast because, of course, there's parliaments all over the world and to some of us they seem kind of impenetrable. I found out it was a prominent non-partisan pressure group in the UK called Unlock Democracy, and I invited their head of campaigns and digital, Shaun Roberts, to come and join us today. Welcome, Shaun.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here. Do you mind if we start, first of all, with just a little bit about what is Unlock Democracy?
Okay, so Unlock Democracy campaigns exclusively in the UK for a better democracy that empowers people, puts people in charge. And so the areas we tend to work in are areas around systemic change, like changing the voting system, reforming the House of Lords and devolution. We also do a lot of work around what we generally would term restoring fairness to the electoral process. So we're involved in quite a big campaign to try and make sure that every eligible voter is actually registered to vote in the UK. We're also trying to get things like big money out of politics to sort of end the dominance of a handful of super rich individuals over our politics and very often the political debate. But we also look forward, and we are one of the few organisations, I think, in the UK that campaigns for a written constitution for the United Kingdom, which is something that the UK is fairly unusual as a democracy not to have a written constitution. And I think over recent years, we've seen a lot of problems in the United Kingdom where, because of that lack of a constitution, it's given governments freedom to change things, take away rights that they probably shouldn't have in a modern democracy. So we very much think that that is something where the moment has come for in the United Kingdom.
Well, we'll probably circle around to that. Could we speak a moment then about the campaign? Could you maybe just outline what was the mission, what was the goal?
Okay, back in 2021, the UK's Electoral Commission, which is the independent watchdog that oversees elections in the United Kingdom, came under threat. They've been involved in a handful of kind of cases involving politicians breaking the rules. And some of those politicians, strangely enough, weren't very happy about being held to account about this. And there was no question that the Electoral Commission was behaving unfairly. It was investigating people on all sides. It was doing what it is supposed to do. But the government at the time, which was the Conservative government under Boris Johnson, decided that they wanted to do something about this. And in fact, at the time, the chair of the Conservative Party actually wrote to the government and said, we should just get rid of the Electoral Commission.
Letter that you can see?
Yeah. I think that sometimes in democracies like the United Kingdom, we can take things a little for granted, because I've worked internationally and done elections in other countries. And I know an independent electoral commission very often is like one of the cornerstones of democracy. And without one, you really struggle. So there previously never been a question about making changes to its independence here. So the government actually brought forward legislation as part of its elections bill that said we will allow ourselves to set the priorities and strategy of the Electoral Commission in a statement, which, effectively took away the independence of the Electoral Commission and allowed the government of the day to sort of say, hey, Electoral Commission, here's what we think you should be focused on. And we thought, and lots of others thought, that this is very much a power that no government should have.
Who are the stakeholders in this campaign? Who did you need to bring on board?
Well, obviously, this was
apart from the British people.
Well, I mean, strangely enough, this kind of thing is quite a difficult thing to get the wider British people intimately involved in. The awareness of what the Electoral Commission does is very much in the background. It is not a super well-known public body, but what the role it plays is one that's quite easy to understand. And one of the things that we did was try and put this into like language that more people could understand. And we'd almost at times take a football analogy to it as saying, well, this is like one side being able to dictate to the referee how they should referee a game. And that was something that people go, that doesn't seem right. But at the time, there was a large Conservative majority in the House of Commons, so it was always going to be very, very difficult to stop it. We very much built a coalition of other organisations. We're a fairly small organisation that really recognises the value of coalition working to really make a difference.
Are you talking about general civil society, or is there something in common about all these groups?
It's civil society groups in particular, so other democracy organisations, but also other political parties, anyone involved in the political process that might look at this and go, hang on, the Electoral Commission has to be independent or the whole thing falls down. And we also reached out in different ways to some of the sort of independent authorities in the United Kingdom. So there's a Committee in Standards in Public Life, for example, which is a very I was about to say a very influential committee. It should be a very influential committee because it is there to safeguard our standards in politics. Unfortunately, it doesn't. It makes a lot of recommendations that very often are ignored by government, and that's a problem.
Is this a parliamentary committee?
It's an independent committee. It was chaired at the time by an independent peer called Lord Evans, and we attended an event with Lord Evans, and we got a question asked about, well, what does he think of this change, allowing the government to set the priorities of the Electoral Commission? And he came up with a very colourful phrase, which is like, this is like handing a toddler a gun. This is not a good idea in any way, shape or form. It is an extraordinarily dangerous thing to give a government the ability to influence how elections are adjudicated and run. And, that was a very powerful thing at the time. Now, we realised that when this legislation was going through, that we were not going to be able to stop it in the House of Commons. The Conservative majority was very large indeed. We did get on board almost all the other opposition parties, in fact, to sort of speak out against it and vote against it. But we lost in the Commons. But our plan at that time was very much, well, let's see what we can do in the House of Lords, because the House of Lords, the government doesn't enjoy a majority. And House of Lords, the role it plays in the United Kingdom is very much to sort of read legislation in more detail, act in a more independent manner, and actually highlight to government when it is perhaps doing something that it really should think twice about. And through a very extensive campaign so not so much in public, but very much directed at peers, issuing regular briefings, meeting with sort of key figures in the Lords, making sure that we had got the right, particularly crossbenchers on side with it, because crossbenchers are independent members of the House of Lords and very often are the balance of power. And through several months of campaigning and debating in the House of Lords, we actually did get it defeated in the House of Lords. But what then happens, it just goes back to the House of Commons, and the House of Commons goes, we're not going to think twice about that. We're going to send that back to the Lords and tell the Lords to think again. And it was right at the end of the parliamentary session, and the Lords rolled over. They didn't send it back for a second time. So we had a brief moment of thinking, wow, we might have stopped this. And it was, unfortunately, just a brief moment. And the government just overturned it in the House of Commons, and the Lords wouldn't push it through a second time, which does sort of highlight one of the problems of our House of Lords, in that because it lacks democratic legitimacy, it can't really have a proper fight with the government, even when it should. And this was definitely one of those times. So
they had the opportunity to really spell out everything that was wrong with it.
Yeah.
But the lower house just ignored them because they don't have any sway.
Yeah. So that was 2022, and it becomes law. Now, we very much were not going to give up with that, even though we knew it would be some time probably until we got it to change. So we very much carried on campaigning.
It's impressive, I mean, you could have just thought, oh, it's law, and it must, that's there's something very final about that for people outside, how this all works. And the fact that you just went, just picked yourselves up and kept going is fantastic.
So,
yeah. Carry on.
We're campaigners, and we know in every campaign there's always many defeats before you get a victory. Sometimes victories come very quickly, and that's lovely, but very often it takes years and years and years and years to kind of get what's right. And so when it's something incredibly important like this, something as fundamental as this, you just can't walk away from that. You can't leave something that's just a complete injustice sitting there. So what sort of followed that is that the various parties enter into their manifesto process as they're running up to the 2024 general election. And we very strongly engaged with those processes and did manage to get it in one or two party manifestos restoring the independence of the Electoral Commission. But I think critically, we kept going some good relationships we built with some Labour politicians during the passage through of the actual elections bill. And very much said, hey, if you end up in power, you could change this. You could restore its independence. And those relationships were very important to maintain. So it wasn't something that potentially would be forgotten if there was a change in government. And of course, in 2024, there was a change in government. Labour came to power with a massive majority. We certainly hoped that would be something that would be then delivered very quickly, restoring the independence of the Electoral Commission. But we actually had to wait, I think, about a year until the government actually published its election strategy. And when it published that election strategy in July 2025, and this was basically an outline of everything that it was going to put in its legislation, it didn't include the independence of the Electoral Commission.
Manifesto? It was in their manifesto?
I don't believe it was in their manifesto, but because manifestos do not go down to perhaps the level of detail about elections that we would like.
Some broad, sweeping, overarching comment about electoral reform. But
there's plenty of stuff that was covering. We want to see fairer elections and strengthen democracy. But we accept that modern day manifestos, certainly in the United Kingdom, do not go down to very high levels of detail in many, many areas. And in fact, very often are very much focused on perhaps the issues that the public are more engaged with, like the cost of living, health, environment, those kinds of issues, which is very understandable. So we do get that. But we were confident that the will of the party, certainly the will of the MPs we've been dealing with, was to restore the independence of the Electoral Commission. But, as I said, unfortunately, when they published their sort of strategy paper, it's not there. And that came as quite a shock to us. In the election strategy paper, there was genuinely some good news. There were lots of positive step forwards, but this wasn't there. And so we really had to sort of set about again, building up a campaign to really kind of put the pressure on. And I can tell you that I remember being at an event with a Labour MP a couple of weeks after the strategy had been published. And I won't reveal her name, but we had a chat with her afterwards and said, look, we know you've been with us on this independence of the Electoral Commission. She said, yeah, absolutely. And we're like, you do realise it's not in the strategy paper? And she's, what do you mean it's not in the strategy paper? And so, it was kind of almost shock from some of the people that have been with us on this, that it wasn't there. And when we did some digging and we got to the sort of bottom of what we thought was going on, and it's not that a spokesperson ever came out and said, this is why we're not planning to restore the independence of the Electoral Commission, but the word we received was that, well, what if the Electoral Commission started to do something that we didn't want them to do? We want to be able to control the Electoral Commission. And you're just kind of like, that is not the way to think in a democracy.
It's kind of upside down.
Yeah, and also to have perhaps a think about what might your opponents do should they be in that situation and in power. And would you want them to have that power? And
maybe a future less reasonable government. Yes.
Indeed. So it was really back to the campaign again, and very much back with our coalition. And the coalition we've been working with on this for, with dozens of other organisations over many years. We were working on the government's new representation of the People's Bill, which, as I say, had a lot of positive things in it that we welcomed. But we were looking to say, okay, how can we strengthen some of the stuff they've gone on a step in the right direction, but actually there's more stuff there. And so we really put the independence of the Electoral Commission back at the heart of that, as almost whatever you're doing around elections, one of the most fundamental things is you've got to have an independent referee, watchdog overseeing the elections that all sides can trust, and most importantly, the public can trust, to say that these people are being even-handed and they're making sure that elections are being done for the benefit of the public, the voter, and not for one party or for the government, because that would be a deeply dangerous place to be.
Indeed. Yes.
So over many, many months, we started campaigning again with people MPs raising this in Parliament, particularly Labour MPs as well as opposition members now, and writing letters to the minister. And eventually we actually got in to see the minister. And there was a meeting that was kind of covering like the whole bill. But the first thing we actually addressed with her was the issue around independence of the Electoral Commission. And she was very circumspect and said, look, we are listening on this issue, which was good. It was the first sort of sign that we actually had that someone's realised this might actually be a problem now. I mean, we were putting forward all the expert advice. I mean, this is one of these sort of strange campaigns where you kind of got all the facts, all the evidence, all the sense of fair play. It should be a very, very one-sided discussion. But strangely, it's not, and it almost never is. And it's very much, if someone has power, they are often reluctant to give up even a little bit of it. And being able to set the Electoral Commission's strategy and priorities is power. I should say, like, all the time this power has been in place, no one has actually set something that you would actually say, that's wrong, that's unfair. But they could have. And in the future, someone else could do that. So our campaign went on through, there was some public stuff, but we were doing briefings with MPs, really trying to build up that noise and actually, to some extent, pushing people in the Labour Party to say, well, you voted against this in opposition. You spoke out so strongly against this in opposition. Now you have the power. Come on, let's put it right. And finally, when the bill was finally published, they did come round, and the independence of the Electoral Commission will be restored once the representation of the People's Bill passes, hopefully later this year. And we're really pleased about that. But it's kind of an odd one because, you know, we always want democracy to be moving forward and getting stronger and better. We don't think this is something, we're just bringing it back to where it was 5 years ago. And it's taken an awful lot of time and effort to do it. Very valuable time and effort. I'm really glad we did it. But in a country where people are sort of so upset, feel let down, have very, very low trust in the political system and the way politics is working for ordinary people right now, it's kind of a shame that, you know, so much effort's been going back into something as kind of basic as this, rather than looking at things where it's like, actually, we need to modernise our political system so it engages more people again and people feel more connected to what's being done in their name and they feel that their vote means something.
Indeed. Could we just speak a little bit about the mechanics? So right at the start, it was really clear, the case, what you were trying to achieve, was pretty black and white, why it was important. And then you set about working out, okay, who else can we bring on this big collab, all the different organisations? And so just to understand the mechanics of that, obviously some of these groups you would have already known personally or you had some connections, but there would have been people you hadn't outreached to before. So was that like just because this is kind of out of the public space at this point? It's like writing emails, making phone calls, trying to kind of build relationships in this coalition. Is that the sort of, how would you describe it?
I mean, I've worked on campaigns where it is like build a million strong petition or national newspaper headlines, all that jazz. And that you can't really do that on a fairly niche part of our democratic process. We know that. But it is something that the politicians themselves do care about because they stand for election every 5 years. They are part of this process. So it was a campaign that was much more focused on getting the politicians to do the right thing. And so the kind of things that we were doing, we were holding like drop-in events where MPs would invite MPs from all parties in to talk about why this was important, why it was a very dangerous power to be in the hands of any government. That definitely helped. We wrote a lot of letters to the minister. We got other MPs to write to the minister and to the Prime Minister. We did a public letter. I'm sound like just letters, but it's a lot more than just letters. But a letter signed by about 18 different civil society organisations, encouraging the government to do the right thing on this. We also did the sort of public petition. As I say, it wasn't a huge petition, but it was tens of thousands of people.
Where was the media on this? I guess because the public was looking elsewhere, they were too, were they?
Exactly. And, you know, it is a The media pay a lot of attention to how elections are run during each election, but their attention tends to be on the parties themselves and not the system that's actually making it work, and certainly not on the adjudicator for that system.
It's really remarkable when you think about the commentary you hear in the media here about elections overseas and different ways that there is no watchdog or there's been some interference by the government. You hear that in the news when they're covering elections around the world. Yeah. So, but the independence of the UK watchdog is not a news story. So that's a bit sad.
We actually heard, I think it was Boris Johnson actually, talking about what you just sort of said, really, very much talking about democracy. It was an international democracy summit that was held around 2022. The UK government was represented at that summit, and to hear them speaking, you'd think, well, they can't have even seen the elections bill that they're in the process of passing at home. But again, this is not something that really gets picked up. I mean, I can remember at the time, I think Joe Biden, when he was president, organised these sort of international democracy summits to promote democracy. It was a really good thing. But the amount of press coverage certainly got in the United Kingdom was tiny, absolutely tiny.
So just bringing this back to our viewers and readers, maybe they've heard of something happening in Parliament and they're really concerned about it. They can see down the track that that's a dangerous development. I guess as an individual, you're really looking for a kind of parliamentary lobby group, a civil society group that's non-partisan, that you can join and to be part of a wider group, because it's other than one letter to your MP and maybe inviting your friends to do the same, it's probably not going to move the needle if it's something to do like what you've been doing. And also to join that group with the expectation that this is going to take a while. And if it's important, it doesn't matter because it's for our children and our grandchildren. And, this is big, what you were dealing with. And so it's kind of, because some people, they have the expectation that, they're going to join this group and be part of this campaign. And, 6 weeks later, bam, we've got our win. Yeah. But this took 5 years and it was really important. And so congratulations. Could I just pause and say that?
Thank
firstly?
you. I mean, we were really happy. Our entire coalition was delighted. And the people that have been doing this for those 5 years, it was really good. Our supporters, our members were very happy and relieved about it as well. But I think that the nature of campaigning is sometimes something can take days or weeks, and sometimes things can take years. And one of the other issues that we work on is around proportional representation for elections, so UK electoral reform. And the most prominent organisation that campaigns on this is the Electoral Reform Society, and they've been going for nearly 100 years. And we haven't won yet, but we're there and we're stepping the campaign up, and I'd argue we're probably closer than we ever have been in that 100 years to getting change. Our new Prime Minister in the United Kingdom, Andy Burnham, is on the record of being a strong supporter of proportional representation for UK elections. And that is...
Recently?
Yeah, very recently.
Okay, interesting. Well, we'll see.
We'll see.
So much resistance against that, that's for sure. I mean,
but there's always resistance, and even to the most obvious things. And so much of this does come back to power. And those that have power don't want to give it up. And in a democracy, the power should be with the people.
In a kind of era of democratic decline and all the winds that are blowing in terms of the rise of authoritarianism and increasing autocracies and entrepreneurial populists, and it's touching the UK and France and Germany and Australia and America and so many places. And authoritarians around the world have entrenched and become more kind of underhand. So as long as they get in, they just change all the rules and so they can stay in, right? So I guess pointing to the future of the United Kingdom and saying, look, if you don't have an independent electoral commission, a future government, it's really a disaster. And then I guess the same argument for a written constitution and a lot of the things you argue for, in the hands of a more autocratic government in this country, these things are really dangerous. So when you point those things out, do elected representatives understand the sort of Are they fearful about that, or are they kind of really preoccupied with the next week and the next year and the next election?
I think for a long time that fear wasn't there. I think
Wasn't there?
wasn't there. And traditional UK politics over the last, I guess, 100 years, there's not really been a fear of that kind of government. But I think in the last 5 to 10 years, seeing what's happening around Europe, seeing what's happening in the US, and seeing the rise of some parties in the United Kingdom, I think that is becoming more of a worry than it ever was before. And to be honest, that's the thing that's probably going to drive change more than anything. And I think there's a very, say, a very British thing of like, really, we don't really like fixing things until they go wrong really, really badly. And I think that's very true when it comes to our democracy, in that, it's had things that have been going wrong for years and years and years. We've not modernised it. We've not kept it up to date. People are getting more and more unhappy about how it works. It's almost like no one wants to touch it until it like crashes. And our argument would be, let's not let it get to that. Let's try and actually do something before that. Because I think the thing I would say about what's happening here and around the world, I think you hit the nail on the head where the authoritarian right, as they're coming through, not usually authoritarian right, they're quite smart. They don't try and say, oh, we don't believe in democracy. They don't say we're to cancel elections. What they do, as we've seen particularly in Hungary, but also to some extent in America as well, is that they will just undermine all the other institutions around it. So actually they can get the powers of a dictator, but still have, be it a notional democracy. And the conditions that make that possible is how unhappy people are with their lives right now. And I think there's a really simple choice that either we modernise our democracy and we make it work again for the people, so people can actually look at it and go, like, my vote matters, it's making a difference. I can see the connection to those politicians again. If we don't do that, then their version of change, which is, hey, we'll just get rid of all these,
Easy answers.
Easy answers. We'll get rid of all the oversight, all the laws around this. We know that's a very, very dangerous place to go. But I think the risk that people in democracy have, or believers in democracy have, is if we're basically trying to defend the status quo while people are very, very unhappy, that is a mistake. And
is that what worries you most? Is
the
tone of the electorate in this country?
I'm a voter myself, and I can look at this and go, in the last 15 years or so, has lives improved in our country? Have people been getting better off? Are we a more prosperous country, a happier country? And the answer to that very clearly is not. And we've changed Prime Minister again and again and again, 7 in 10 years. And people look at it saying, well, it still feels like nothing's changing. And the reason we would say that this is because actually our political system hasn't been kept up to date. It's no longer fit for purpose in this modern day and age. And that's why we need the kind of reforms that actually make people's voices heard again about democracy. So democracy has to improve and change, or we risk potentially losing it, although losing it in a very sort of subtle way.
Yes, step by step, behind closed doors. Nobody's noticing. And is there something you can share about the joy of campaigning, even on a really difficult long-term campaign? Or if that's not your experience, be honest.
I mean, I'm here today because I took politics at school. I wasn't from a political family and not got the bug. What fired me up is the first time I saw proper homelessness in the United Kingdom. And you're just like, how? Why? This is wrong. And it's something that's just sort
of... Where was it? What did you see it? And how old were you?
About 14 years old. It was the first trip I'd ever had into London. And it was in the winter and it's freezing cold. And I'm a school kid going on a school trip for this event. And you just look at this and go, how? That started up my activism.
Really upset you.
Yes.
Yeah. And how could this be in this country? How could this be?
A rich country like ours. And I spent about 15 years campaigning in my spare time you could just call it as a hobby, but it was a passion. But then I was fortunate enough to be offered a job doing campaigning. So for the last 25 years, I've effectively been paid to do the thing I used to do for free.
It's always been a passion.
It's tackling injustice, and I don't want to sort of say something corny like changing the world, but if you want, I do want to change the world. I mean, there is so much injustice. There's so much possibility that's there for people, and so often it's because a small number of people in power want things to be best just for a small group of people like them. And democracy is supposed to change that. Democracy can change that, and that's why I kind of, every day I come to work and I go, okay, this campaign might take a while, but we're not going to stop. And I saw that this one, we won, and the bill that's going through Parliament at the moment that this government's put through, there are several key wins in there. It's just that actually I'll be honest, it's been a lean spell for wins and democracy. We need to get some bigger ones in while the going is good, particularly with the threat of like rising authoritarianism and genuine threats to democracy. Now is the time where we should be building up the defences and building up our democracy to be at strongest possible level to actually, really show the people that this is what it's going to make their life better, and not effectively handing over the power to one person as a sort of mini dictator or whatever.
Yeah, it's a huge important goal and a very inspiring goal. Happy for you to get this win, to you and all the people involved. And anything else you want to share before we sign off?
I'd just say, keep dreaming and never ever give up, because quite often it's the ones that just never give up come out on top in the end.
That's a great message. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye for now. If you enjoyed this episode, please post a review or rating. And a one-line review has a huge impact in helping others to find us. Thank you for your support.